Hey, what's going on, guys? Rum Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Restoration Druid for 1105, still in Season 1. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the changes and just from a Mythic Plus setting, how to play Restoration Druid. This guide is going to be specifically on the Keeper of the Grove talent tree. This is not going to cover anything with Wildstock. We're going to do a separate video for that. So if you clicked on this video expecting that, I do apologize. This is only going to be covering Keeper of the Grove. All right, we're not going to talk about absolutely everything for 1105. We're going to talk about some of the major stuff. So one of the main things that we're seeing is Reforestation now procs after every 4 Swiftman casts. This was every 3 Swiftman casts prior. So kind of looks like a little bit of a nerf, but to be honest, it's really not once you factor in Renewing Surge here. So the cooldown of Swiftman is reduced by up to 40% based on the current health of the target. So this is a brand new talent here, and this is going to allow us to actually get more Swiftmans in, right? The lower CDR in Swiftman, the more you can cast it. Therefore, you know, four casts of Swiftman isn't necessarily as bad as it sounds. Another talent that's super strong is Twin Leaf. So Nature Swiftness now has 2 charges. So one of the main issues that Restoration Druid, at least when I play it, seems to have is we don't have a ton of cooldowns. So by giving us another charge of Nature Swiftness, we just have more tools at our disposal. It's, you know, it's another cooldown being added to our toolkit. That's one of the things we really need as Restoration Druids. So a very powerful talent right here in the middle of the tree. Going to be very hard to pass up on. I would probably consider this a core talent. Now, another very core talent we have is going to be in the bottom right-hand side of the tree. This is called Force Flow. We'll just read it out here. Consuming clear casting now causes your regrowth to also cast Nourish onto a nearby injured ally, 60% effectiveness, preferring those with your heal over time effects. So I do believe this was like a season 3 or 4 Dragonflight tier set bonus, which has now kind of been worked into our talent tree. And this is what made Restoration Druid so powerful late in Dragonflight, was this talent here. So the fact that this is being reintroduced into our tree really solves a lot of problems that Restoration Druid has kind of had. You know, our cooldowns aren't the best, but we're able to really spot heal very well now with Force Flow. Now, one thing that is different about this talent is it's only 60% effectiveness, and in Dragonflight it was 200% effectiveness. So you know, it is quite a bit weaker than it used to be. So we'll just kind of have to see how this pans out over the course of, you know, the remainder of the season, how strong this is going to be. This is really going to help us with spot healing. We need a lot of burst healing in this sort of meta where people are just getting one shot by things. So this is really going to help us. Another thing that's been changed is Omen of Clarity is now a passive ability, right? So it's no longer a talent. So that gives us another talent point that we can kind of free up and spend it elsewhere. Then on top of that, Harmonious Blooming is only 1 talent point. So instead of the normal 2, so we have 2 extra talent points that we can kind of spend elsewhere. So this build specifically that I'm going over, and just the tree in general, really leans into Swiftman. We have a lot of things that synergize with it, right? We have Grove Trending, of course. We have Renewing Surge that's focused around Swiftman. We have Reforestation that's focused around Swiftman. We have Soul of the Forest that's focused around Swiftman. And then we also have Cenarius Might. So, oh, and over here on the far right, we have Prosperity that gives us 2 Swiftman charges. So if you don't like playing around Swiftman, then this build probably won't be your favorite. Okay, that's it for changes. So for Keeper of the Grove, I kind of have 2 sort of different class trees that I go back and forth between. I have more of a caster style class tree, and then I have another tree that focuses more on cat form if that's what you like to play. So I'm going to put both builds in the description of the video. Just know that the caster form is going to focus a little bit more around like Nature's Vigil. We're going to have Star Surge in here. We're going to have Starlight Conduit, you know, a lot of different things that focus more around the caster centric playstyle rather than going into cat form. Now, I'm not saying that's the better way to play it. That's just how I play it. But I will have the talents in the description. Again, if you do enjoy cat form, you can take a look at those as well. All right, enough of that. Let's just kind of talk about, for the beginners here, what Restoration Druid even is. How do you play it? Just kind of starting from point A and just kind of, you know, working our way up. So historically speaking, Restoration Druid's been a spec where you apply a lot of heal over time effects and you build those up. And the more heal over time effects you get on a target, the more your healing power scales. It scales exponentially the more HoTw you get on a target. And that is due to we have a mastery, if I can find it really quick. And that's going to be on the final page. Mastery of Harmony here. Your healing is increased by 8.9% for each of your restoration and heal over time effects on the target. So this does not mean your healing overall as a healer goes up by 8.9%. It means your healing to that specific target is increased by 8.9% per hot effect. So kind of confusing on the wordage here, but that's kind of how that works. And then like we said earlier, we do have our Omen of Clarity here. So your healing over time effects from a Life Bloom have a 5% chance to cause a clear casting state, making your next regrowth cost no mana. So let's quickly go over some of our core spells, kind of how they synergize with our talent tree, and just try to break everything down. So first spell we have here is Efflorescence. You place it on the ground. I have it on a @cursor macro, so I can just press 1. I'll put all the macros that we talk about in this video in the description, so you can check those out. But we place it on the ground here, and it does a whole bunch of healing to the allies standing within your Life Bloom, or excuse me, within your Efflorescence. All right, let's talk about some spells that kind of synergize with that Efflorescence. So main one here is going to be Verdancy. So when Life Bloom blooms, up to 3 targets within your Efflorescence are healed for X amount. So you could have a Life Bloom on a target that's not standing in your Efflorescence, and when that blooms, then everybody standing within the green circle, right, will get that healing from that bloom effect from Life Bloom. So we haven't talked about what the bloom effect is, but we'll talk about that here very shortly. Let's continue on with Efflorescence. One more spell here. So we have Spring Blossoms. Each target healed by Efflorescence is healed for an additional 11,000 over 6 seconds. So this is another heal over time effect that's applied to everybody standing in our Efflorescence. And the heal over time effect by itself is very weak. However, if we go back to our spellbook and we look at our Mastery Harmony, we can see that each heal over time effect again increases our healing to that target. So everybody standing in your Efflorescence will always get those stacks of mastery. And that's really, really strong, right? Because that basically means anybody standing in your green circle gets a 9% more healing from you. So let's go ahead and talk about Life Bloom now. So we talked about this like bloom effect thing that happens. What exactly is that? So Life Bloom is probably going to be your most potent single target heal over time effect. So reading it out here, heals the target for X amount over 15 seconds. When Life Bloom expires or is dispelled, the target is instantly healed for X amount. So one thing that makes Life Bloom really strong is it counts as 3 stacks of our Mastery of Harmony, and that's going to be through a talent that we discussed earlier, Harmonious Blooming. Now, one thing to note about Life Bloom that's not in the tooltip is at the end of its effect, it will bloom and do a bunch of healing for us. And you can actually recast Life Bloom before it expires to get that bloom effect. I can't exactly remember what it is. I think it's like 4.5 seconds that you can recast Life Bloom and get that bloom effect. So you don't have to wait for the whole duration of Life Bloom to expire before you get that additional healing. So there's a couple other talents that synergize with Life Bloom. So let's talk about those really quick. We have Budding Leaves. So I put 2 points into this. So Life Bloom's healing is increased by 6% each time it heals up to 90%. And then this will also increase Life Bloom's final bloom by 15%. Now, a couple other talents that synergize with Life Bloom. The first one is going to be Undergrowth. So you may Life Bloom 2 targets at once, but Life Bloom's healing is reduced by 10%. And then we also have Photosynthesis. So when Life Bloom is on yourself, all your hot effects will heal 10% faster. So that's pretty dang strong. And then the second portion of this is while Life Bloom's on an ally, your periodic heals have a 4% chance to cause it to bloom. So normally what I'm doing is I'm putting a Life Bloom on myself to get that 10% additional healing from all of my hot effects. And then I'm putting another Life Bloom probably on a DPS. Just kind of depends. You can put it on a tank if you know a tank buster's coming, a huge bleed effect or something. But for the most part, I'm putting it on myself and then one of the squishy DPS. Okay, up next we have our Wild Growth ability. So the way Wild Growth works is you cast it, and this is going to put a heal over time effect over yourself and the entire party. So the healing will start out really, really fast and it'll actually decline over its duration. And this is going to be your main AoE heal. Now, since we're on, we're talking about Wild Growth, let's go ahead and talk about Soul of the Forest. I really want to talk about this probably more in the Swiftman section But since we haven't covered Swiftman yet, this might not make any sense, but Swiftman is going to increase the healing of your next regrowth or rejuvenation by 150% or your next wild growth by 50%. So we'll talk about this more when we get into the Swiftman section, but just know that before you cast a wild growth, you really want to try and Swiftman before it so that you can beef up your wild growth healing by 50%. So what you can do is apply a wild growth or something like that to yourself, consume that with a Swiftman charge, and then just go ahead and go straight into a wild growth to get that additional healing. And this is a little bit easier to pull off when you're running something like Prosperity, because now Swiftman has 2 charges. You have more access to be able to, Swiftman kind of whenever you want. So wild growth, a very strong talent. We'll also be taking unstoppable growth here. So wild growth healing falls off 30% less over time. That's just going to be a nice buff to our wild growth and just our general AoE healing. So highly recommend to put 2 points into that. Up next, let's talk a little bit about regrowth. So our build is really focused around regrowth spam. So regrowth is going to be your single target heal. It's got a cast time. It puts a small heal over time effect. It applies a stack of mastery. And used to, we didn't play around regrowth a whole bunch, but now here in season 1, we're kind of in this sort of regrowth Swiftman centric sort of play style. And then your HoTws are almost like, I don't want to say they're an afterthought, but we're not as reliant on them. So your HoTws are still, don't get me wrong on that, your HoTws are still very, very powerful, but we seem to be focused more on regrowth and Swiftman than we have in the past. So we talked about clear casting earlier. Basically, this is a proc that will come up and it will make your next regrowth free. So this is Omen of Clarity, and this is actually going to proc from Life Bloom. So this is why it's pretty nice to be able to run the double Life Bloom build, because now we get more ticks of Life Bloom, more clear casting procs, better mana management. So here's what it looks like when it procs. You sort of get this green sort of leaf thing. Kind of went away on me there. Let's see if I can get it back. Here it is. We got it back. So it lasts for 13, 14 seconds, and it says your next regrowth is free, and this can actually stack up to 2 times. So we can cast it twice in a row, and you can see it didn't use any mana for either of those casts. Now we have a lot that's kind of going on with regrowth, so let's kind of talk about it. First thing we're going to talk about is rampant growth. So we talked about earlier how we can Life Bloom a DPS, we can Life Bloom a tank. You just got to kind of fill your group out. There's no clear-cut way to handle Life Bloom, specifically the targets that need healing get Life Bloom. So if you're in a situation where your tank is chain pulling and he needs healing, go ahead and Life Bloom the tank. That's totally okay. But through rampant regrowth, regrowth's healing over time effect is increased by 50%, and it also applies to the target of your Life Bloom. So what this means is we can kind of use regrowth to spot heal, and we can Life Bloom the tank or a DPS, kind of whatever, and our regrowths on other targets will then be kind of sent to that Life Bloom target as well. So this actually gets even better with the new Force Flow talent that we just talked about, but this only happens on clear casting procs that we just talked about. So when we consume those clear casting procs, our regrowth is also going to cast Nourish onto a nearby ally at 60% effectiveness. So this is one of the reasons it's very important to always keep 2 Life Blooms up, because we want to get as many clear casting procs as possible so that we can spam out more of these regrowths for more Nourish casts. So it's sort of this like chain reaction that happens. And all of that starts with the clear casting proc, which again starts with double Life Bloom. All right, now let's finally get into Swiftman, which is going to be the really core portion of playing Restoration Druid, at least this season. So the main talent that we have here in the middle is Cenarius Might. So casting Swiftman increases your haste by 10% for 6 seconds. So this is why it's really important to pretty much be casting your Swiftman, I won't say on cooldown, but very often, is so that you can get this 10% haste buff. Haste is our best secondary stat, so we're going to make sure that we're getting as much of it as we can throughout the course of the dungeon. Now, this is one of the reasons that I like to run Prosperity, is because Swiftman now has 2 charges. So the more charges of Swiftman, the more haste we get. Now, we also have Reforestation. So every 4 casts of Swiftman grants you Incarnation Tree of Life for 10 seconds. So let's take a step back here for a second. Let's just take a look at what Swiftman even is. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here. Let's just read this out here. So Swiftman consumes a regrowth, wild growth, or rejuvenation effect to instantly heal an ally for X amount. Swiftman will also heal the target for X amount over 9 seconds. We get 2 charges through talents on a 15-second recharge. So what I can do is I can regrowth myself. I can see, let me do myself. You see I have a regrowth effect on me, and I can consume that with Swiftman. So if I don't have a heal over time effect on myself, I can't press Swiftman. So a main core game loop of Restoration Druid right now is to consume those heal over time effects with Swiftmans, and then we get a whole bunch of buffs that our character gets, through Reforestation, through Cenarius Might, through Soul of the Forest, all that. So let's just take another step back here and take a look at Swiftman just kind of holistically. So we have Soul of the Forest. When we consume the Swiftman, we get beefed up healing on our wild growth, regrowth, rejuvenation. We have Cenarius Might. When we consume a Swiftman, we get the haste. And we have Reforestation. Every 4 casts of Swiftman grant us that Tree of Life, which is going to give us a bunch of instant cast regrowths. So if you're not sure what Tree of Life is, it's actually a talent here on a 3-minute cooldown. We just get it for a shorter duration through Reforestation, but it is a talent here. So we get more healing done, we get increased armor, and we get a whole bunch of, just better effects to our healing spells like regrowth, rejuve, wild growth. So we want to be in Tree of Life as much as we possibly can because we are very, very powerful in that state. So I actually do have a WeakR that tracks this, but I don't think it's up to date. So there's probably a better WeakR out there for this. You might do a little digging on your own, but what we can do is cast Swiftman. We get a little tracker here, and this will count every time we cast Swiftman. It'll just kind of count our stacks towards that Tree of Life proc. So you can see we got 2 stacks here. It used to be 3 stacks, right? So it would glow at 2 saying, hey, your next cast of Swiftman is going to activate Tree of Life. But since this is outdated, it really should be glowing at 3 stacks. So we'll do one more here. You see we're at 3 stacks. And then on the next cast of Swiftman, we will go into our tree, and you can see our abilities that are enhanced here. They're glowing, and we get those instant cast regrowths. So yeah, there's probably a better WeakR out there for that, to be able to track that. I just haven't found it yet. I did a little bit of looking around. Nothing's popped out to me quite yet. So if you do have a good one, please put it in the comments below. And then another healing spell. I think this is the final healing spell that I really want to talk about. Then we'll kind of get into cooldowns, is Rejuvenation. So we're not casting Rejuvenation a whole bunch. The only time you're really casting Rejuvenation is to get stacks of your Mastery Harmony. If you know there's a huge damage phase coming out and you really want to get as much spread healing out as possible, you can prep your group with some Rejuvenations, but that's pretty much the only time you press this button outside of that and movement. So if you are moving around, you're trying to dodge some frontals, whatever, there's nothing else to press, but people need to be healed, it's okay to throw out a Rejuvenation here and there. But this doesn't really fit into your core rotation. It doesn't give us enough healing, unfortunately. Okay, let's talk about Keeper of the Grove and just cooldowns in general. So let's start out with our Grove Guardians. So Grove Guardians are going to be these little trees that you spawn out, and you spawn them, and they're just going to do passive healing for you. Now, there's a lot of effects that actually come from these guys that aren't like super obvious. So the first one's Harmony of the Grove. Each of your Grove Guardians will increase your healing done by 5% at pretty much a flat rate. So you kind of always want to try to have a Grove Guardian going so that you're benefiting from that 5% healing done. And then we also have our Dream Surge here. So Grove Guardians causes your next targeted heal to create 3 Dream Petals near the target, healing up to 3 nearby allies for X amount, stacks up to 3 charges. This is kind of a way to get some emergency burst healing out for us. So what we can do is cast our Grove Guardians, and then you can see in the top right, I have my frames kind of cropped oddly, but I have a buff here called Dream Surge, and my next targeted heal is going to proc that. So I will heal myself, and if you notice on the ground here, there's these little flowers that pop up. They all did some additional healing to me. So that's really nice for emergency healing because we can kind of pick and choose who we want those petals to go to and do some additional healing on them. Another pretty good external that we have is Cenarian Word here. So 45-yard range, 30-second cooldown, protects a friendly target for 30 seconds. Any damage taken will consume the word and heal the target for X amount over 8 seconds. So I just kind of like to throw this out. if you are tracking targeted spells, this is a great ability to use to be able to soak that targeted effect. But the way it works, I have it on my queue here. I'll just press it. You can see it put a small shield over the target dummy. It's got 4 or 5 seconds left, and it's doing a little bit of passive healing to it as well. Okay, we're not going to talk about every single, little cooldown like Renewal, Bark Skin, Iron Bark. You can look those up yourself in your spellbook, kind of see what those are. There's not too much to explain there. Let's talk about some of the major stuff, though. Let's talk about Convoke the Spirits versus Incarnation Tree of Life. So I like to run Convoke the Spirits because it's on a 1-minute cooldown, and I can get more access to a big burst AoE healing cooldown. A lot of other people like to run Incarnation Tree of Life, which is okay, especially for like a very sustained amount of healing that you need over the course of like 30 seconds. So Convoke is going to be, you press it, people go up in health, it's pretty much done. And then Incarnation Tree of Life is you're going to be in that Tree of Life form for 30 seconds, and you're going to be able to pump out a whole bunch of healing for that duration. But the con of it is it's a 3-minute cooldown. So if you are running Convoke the Spirits, there is a little bit of a trick with Convoke that you can do with your Nature Swiftness. So if you do Nature Swiftness before you press Convoke, all of the regrowths that come out of Convoke will be buffed up. So if we go back to Nature Swiftness, 1-minute recharge, your next regrowth, rebirth, or entangling roots is instant, free, castable in all forms, and heals for an additional 100%. So again, if we Nature Swiftness, then cast Convoke, all the regrowth cast during our Convoke window will get beefed up by 100%. And then not only that, at the end of the Convoke window, it won't even consume the Nature Swiftness charge. So we will still have that Nature Swiftness charge available to us. So let's take a quick look at how that works. So I do have a macro for this. So it's on a cast sequence reset of 5 seconds, and it just pairs Nature Swiftness with our Convoke. So it's all in one button press. I have it on my Shift 3, so I'll press it. 2 button presses, I guess. And then all those regrowths that got casted were buffed by 100%. And we can see in the top right, I think you guys can see it, we still have the Nature Swiftness effect for our next regrowth. So I can come in here and press regrowth. I get the instant cast regrowth. And then another really cool thing is, since we are taking Twin Leaf here, Nature Swiftness now has 2 charges. The other charge is still on our Shift 3. It's available to use. I can press it now, and I can go ahead and regrowth. And since we paired that Nature Swiftness with Convoke, those 2 cooldowns will always align up. They're always 1 minute. So you can see it's coming off cooldown in 3 seconds. So I'm going to press it again here. Those 2 cooldowns lined up, and you can just kind of continue the cycle. Now, depending on your class tree talents, what you choose to pick, you can also Heart of the Wild and Nature's Vigil in front of that Convoke window to get a whole bunch of additional damage out. So Nature's Vigil, 1.5 minute cooldown for 15 seconds, all single target healing, also damages a nearby enemy target for 20% of the healing done. And then Heart of the Wild, if we take a look at the balance section, cast time of balance spells reduced by 30%, and the damage increased by 20 seconds. Excuse me, 20%. I don't know why I said seconds there. So you can pair these 2 up with your Convoke window and do a whole bunch of additional damage. Okay, now let's take a look at sort of your general healing rotation, what you're kind of looking to do going from pack to pack or on a boss fight, right? So you always want to have your green circle down, and you want as many people to be standing in this as possible. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to get 2 life blooms out, 1 on the tank, 1 on yourself. You can also put 1 on a DPS, just depends on your group. Then from there, to be honest, if you look at my mouse, I have a weak R here that kind of tracks. It's almost telling you like what button to press next. So I got it loaded here, and it's not necessarily telling you what button to press next, but it's telling you what's available. And this is sort of like your core rotation right here. So if you want to check this out, it's in the description of the video. I'm going to go into my settings. I'm type /WA, and here it is. It's called a Resto Druid Cursor. And you see all the different spells and things that it tracks, right? Soul the Force procs, Nature Swiftness, Swiftman, and Iron Word. So when you import this, it is a little bit bloated. So if you want, you could come in here and you could turn off some of this stuff. Like Adaptive Swarm, you could probably turn that off. That's an older spell from Dragonflight. We don't have that anymore. You come in here and you could even just delete this if you don't want it to load, or you could just go to the load tab and turn it off. And that spell will never load essentially in this list. But I always play Resto Druid with something like this because it is so high APM and there's so many things to track, and you have to get uptime on as many things as possible. So this is going to tell you what this is showing you right here. It's saying, hey, this spell is ready to cast. So you'll notice with Efflorescence here, the little red icon, it's got the glow around it. So when I press it, it disappears from the list. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So when we press Wild Growth, again, it disappears from the list. So it's almost like a checklist of things that you need to be doing, a checklist of things that you need to be prioritizing. Now you can see Wild Growth there is about to come off cooldown, so it pops back into the list. This is almost like an order of priority of what you need to be focusing on to keep up. So you kind of just want to go through the list. I'm not saying just like press the button just because it's glowing, but it kind of trains your brain on what you should be prioritizing, what's available in your toolkit to use. And if something does fall off, right, you can get it back up. So Efflorescence, if for whatever reason Efflorescence comes off the ground, it will warn you and it'll tell you, hey, press this button essentially. So for example, another thing that I wouldn't want to track is nature swiftness. It's not something that I personally want to track. It's not something that is really in my core rotation that I'm worried about. So I'm going to remove that, and we're just going to go in here, right click, delete. And then Soul of the Forest is something else I don't really want to track. I know when it happens, I know that it follows my Swiftmen, so it's not really something that I really want showing up. So I will remove that. So that leaves us with Life Bloom, Efflorescence, Wild Growth, Cenarian Words, Swiftmen, and Grove Guardians. So if we go back to our list here, this is what it looks like now, and this is going to be my core rotation. This is what I'm trying to keep uptime on is these 6 core spells here. So typically what I'll do, if you go into a pool, we'll get our Efflorescence down, a Life Bloom on our tank or DPS, a Life Bloom on ourself. We'll get Wild Growth up, Cenarian Ward up on the tank. We can Swiftman, get a Grove Guardian down, and then we can go into regrowth spams. And we can see here, Wild Growth is back off cooldown. We have a Swiftman charge again. And we're just kind of keeping track of things, as they come on and off cooldown. Now, another thing that's kind of annoying with this weak art is it will put spells back into the queue when they're not ready to be pressed. So a spell will pop back up and it'll say, hey, this is coming off cooldown in 4 seconds. Well, I don't really care if it's coming off cooldown in 4 seconds. I want to know when it's ready to press. So what I did is you can just go back into your weak art settings and you can go into each spell. Let's just use Wild Growth as an example. You can come in here into trigger 1 and change this remaining time from 5 seconds to 1 second. And you can do that for every single spell. If it does have the cooldown trigger, I don't believe that will. Cenarian Word will. We're going to change that to 1 second. We're going to change Swiftman to 1 second. And then Grove Guardians, let's see how that's set up. I guess 1 second as well. So what that means is these spells are not going to pop up into our list until they're ready to press. So let's check Wild Growth. We'll press it. We'll give it a few seconds here. Looks like it's going to get about 5 more seconds here. And it shouldn't pop up until 1 second. There it is. It's ready to press. Now that everything's set up, your typical rotation is going to look something like this. An Efflorescence on the ground, Life Bloom on the tank, Life Bloom on yourself into a Wild Growth. We can get a Swiftman charge out of the way. We can Cenarian Word the tank, and let's go ahead and get a Grove Guardian out. We are spamming regrowths, and we're just waiting on spells to come off cooldown. So we got a regrowth that came off cooldown. We got another charge of Swiftman. Let's get rid of that. Reapply our Life Blooms into some regrowths. We see a Grove Guardian just went away. We'll press another, and that's sort of like your core gameplay loop. All right, then final thing we're going to talk about here is going to be secondary stats. So you're going to be focused on eye level and intellect above absolutely everything else. Then from there, we're going to be focused on haste, versatility, into mastery, into critical strike. Now you can swap versatility and mastery out Like if you need a little bit more healing, you can put mastery above versatility. If you need a little bit more survivability, you can put versatility over mastery. Now, haste is going to be very important because we're a heal over time effect. We want as many ticks in our HoTs as possible within a shorter duration. So we're also a very high APM spec. So we're casting a lot of spells all the time. So we want to be able to have those spells complete their ticks faster. And we also want to be able to press our buttons faster to get more up. Versatility is just a pretty good all-around stat. This is going to give us damage reduction. It's going to give us a little bit more damage and a little bit more healing. It's never really a bad stat on hardly any healing specialization. Then up third, we are going to have a mastery harmony. So your healing is going to be increased for each heal over time effect that we have on that target. Again, this does not increase your healing done to all targets, just healing done to that one specific target. And then finally, we have critical strike at the very bottom of our list. There's just not a ton of synergy that goes on between critical strike and our talent tree. And of course, we cannot end the video without saying thank you to our patrons. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.